All right. You guys got me fired up. At least Twitter has. At least the Yinzers have. Because the Steelers' season looks to be another lost year. It looks to be another failure, especially with all that talent on the Pittsburgh Steelers. It looks to be another year of underachieving. But you guys are blaming the referees. Your number one point of blame is the referees. And I'm here to tell you why that's just crazy. This is another episode of Mic Drop here. This one on the heels of another Pittsburgh Steelers loss. Coming at you from the Beaver County Auto studios up above Market Square here in downtown Pittsburgh. I am your host, Mike Asti, and I'm your truth teller, whether you want to hear it or not. You can hate the truth, but you can't deny it. I'm going to sell that as often as I can. Now, as I was saying, still fired up here, you guys are blaming the referees. And I want to make this clear. The referees sucked. The referees sucked. There were controversial calls, and it's not even just about the Saints game that we're coming off of. There were controversial calls throughout the season. There were controversial calls in the Chargers game, number one. Controversial calls for really both teams. The Patriots could even argue about a few in the game against New England, which was a win for the Steelers. And a phantom pass interference call early against the Saints. Joe Hayden wasn't near the ball. It was well overthrown and was uncatchable, leading to a Saints touchdown. So the referees sucked. I'm not here to defend the referees by any means. Not here to defend the referees. But what I'm also not here to do is let this team off the hook. I'm not going to do what you guys are doing. I am not going to allow the Pittsburgh Steelers, and they're not going to do this either. You talk to any of the coaches, any of the players, Mike Tomlin will tell us all through this week, like he'll tell us every week, like he always tells us through every year, whether it be his 2 AFC crowns, his championship season, other division titles in playoff years where they were disappointing throughout their playoff run that doesn't go as far as they would think it should, or even years where they missed the playoffs and years like this one. He'll always tell you, no excuses, we should have been better. But especially this year with this kind of talent, especially this year with these aspirations, and there were question marks about the defense, etc. coming into the year, but if they think they're a championship caliber team, and the landscape of the AFC kind of dictated that, it wasn't that elite, the Patriots are even lesser than who they were, namely off of the Steelers win, and I detailed that in another show here for Pittsburgh Sports Live. But they're not going to let the team off the hook, so neither am I, and neither should you. Now, when I try to bring this truth, I go viral and I get hate. Do you just not want to hear it, or do you rather have the conspiracy notion? Because check these out. And these are tweets gone viral, and these are tweets that you're mad about for me at. These are tweets that are actually bringing me threats and bringing me hate and bringing attack my way. You think this is a heel opinion somehow, when in reality, it's just the truth. They're just truth serum for you guys. Here's one. Had somebody not enjoy the asking questions and answering them, and I could see that maybe being annoying and a pet peeve, but I did it here. Maybe I'm crazy, but I'm also telling the truth. Did the refs make some pretty horrible calls against the Steelers this season? Yes. Does Juju need to not lose the ball in the last-minute drive? Yes, and I'll get to Juju in a second. Are either the reason the Steelers will miss the playoffs? No. Beat the Browns without Baker and the Ravens and the Raiders? You're in. Fact. Undeniable fact right there. Because yes, the referees sucked. Yes, there were controversial calls, but the referees have sucked throughout the entire season. The referees have been levying controversial calls for years. Des Bryant and the Dallas Cowboys are still upset and still claim it's a catch. He's not even on the Cowboys anymore, and he's still tweeting about how that was a catch in the playoff game against Green Bay. There were the beginning of the Patriots dynasty. There was a rule that nobody ever heard of prior to that, called the Tuck rule, that led the way to the Patriots' run with Brady and Belichick. The Raiders are still saying that was a controversy that shouldn't have been. On this day, Pittsburgh Steelers were celebrating an anniversary, the day of the Saints' loss. That was anniversary back in 1972 of the Immaculate Reception from Franco Harris. Controversy there. That sparked a dynasty, a Steel Curtain dynasty in the 70s. Got their first playoff win, and then a couple years later, Super Bowl, boom, boom, boom. Controversy there. The Raiders still said about that one. John Madden, anytime you throw him into a broadcast booth and you have Steelers Raiders brought up, he'll go there and say it shouldn't have been, and it was controversial. So there's always controversy. And sometimes they're isolated in some of those moments, Tuck rule, sometimes in those playoff games where it's live or die, it's win or die in those playoff games. Then I can see maybe going at the referees. I can see some 72 Raider fans. I could see some 2001 Raider fans. Okay. If that one play maybe did do it in those playoff games. But not when we're talking about a playoff appearance in a totality of an entire regular season. And not off this Steeler year. Not off these games. Not analyzing the 2018 Pittsburgh Steelers. No. Dikembe Mutombo? No. Not going to do it. Not going to let you do it. Or at least I'm going to tell you why you're wrong and crazy for doing it. Here's another one. And this is what I'm talking about. You guys hated this. This went viral and you hated it as well. It's more truth. This Steelers season embodies why you can't lose games against bad teams. The controversy of the Chargers and Saints games wouldn't matter nearly as much if the Browns' tie and the Raiders' loss were both wins. Don't blame the refs. Blame the Steelers for a wasted season. So if this year is a missed playoff opportunity, if this year is not an AFC North crown in a relatively winnable division with weaker teams, down years, and quarterback carousels, if this year is not a playoff appearance by the Steelers and is a wasted year with all that talent, because they're the most talented team in the division by far, if not one of the most talented teams in football, and you could argue that, at least on offense, don't blame the refs. Number one, sure, again, there were controversial calls. There were bad calls for every team. Every team could point to a game this year where there were controversial calls. The Bills, the Lions, whoever. They could all point to games this year, the Packers could, where there were controversial calls or bad calls, and those calls, they could argue, if went the other way, would have changed the course of that individual game. And I brought up individual playoff games. You could bring up those individual playoff games of the past, and if a call went another way, it might have changed the course of those individual playoff games. Okay, so individually, I might be with you. Individually, if the pass interference phantom call didn't go against Joe Hayden in that Saints game, individually, sure, maybe that would have changed this game. But also there was a few pass interference calls that went against the Saints, one that was a holding call late in that game that wasn't a PI, a little chintzy there as well. Not as egregious, nothing as egregious as the Joe Hayden. That was well overthrown, he wasn't near it. So that I wouldn't have called pass interference. I'm with you there. And individually, sure, if that wasn't called, maybe that touchdown doesn't happen, but they also still may have got in. But even if you take those points away and say this Saints game is a win, that doesn't excuse the entire year. You shouldn't be able to do that just off of the referees when you're talking about an entire year. This isn't the postseason. We're talking about an entire year and whether or not they're going to make the playoffs, whether or not they're going to waste a talented team like this in another season and not even get into the postseason maybe. Because, again, and I'll stress this all through every week as much as I can, if the Steelers simply made way less mistakes on their own, and this doesn't include the referees, this includes 5 interceptions being thrown, a myriad of turnovers, in several of these games, and kind of a slow, sluggish start for Big Ben, an elite future Hall of Famer, and I'll defend him to the end that he is a Hall of Famer and played great against the Saints, but every game matters in the totality of a regular season. The late games don't matter more than the beginning games. This is not college football. This is not a committee. This is not the college football playoff committee deciding teams. There's no BCS here. There's no computer. There's no one arguing in a boardroom to which team is better than who and whether you want the 4 best or whether you want teams and who's more deserving and strength of schedule. That's not going on here. This is about the games. This is about playing your schedule, playing your games, needing to win enough of those to beat just your real division opponents, and that'll be enough to get you into the postseason and winning a division. That's all you need to worry about, really. So, with that said, even if you say the referee screwed him out of the Saints game, it shouldn't have mattered. Shouldn't have mattered. If the Steelers would have beat a Cleveland Browns team instead of tying them, and mind you, that's a Browns team prior to Baker Mayfield becoming the starter. So it's a Browns team without Baker Mayfield, who is going through the rookie growing pains, but it was certainly helping them become a much better football team throughout this year, and has certainly played well enough to become their starter for next season and make many Browns fans believe in him and that team for next season. You can certainly argue the jury is still out for his career, but he has been the best Cleveland Browns quarterback in several years based on what he's just done this year, even getting them into not being eliminated until the end of the season, getting them into sniffing of contention at the end of the season. That's thanks to Baker Mayfield and changing the course of that franchise this year and maybe the future of that franchise after a winless season a year ago, in which they also almost beat the Steelers a couple times. Granted, they still won the division and had all the wins and then went to the playoffs with that loss to Jacksonville, which wasn't on the refs, that was on the defense. I was there. I covered that game, and trust me, that wasn't the referees. But maybe you don't tie a Cleveland Browns team prior to Baker Mayfield. So no Baker, no legitimate starter, and you tie the Cleveland Browns off of a myriad of turnovers. But okay, say that's a rival, put that one aside because they eventually had to get a win. And that's early in the season. Everyone's still getting things moving, finding their footing. Let's go towards the end of the year then. Fine, let's go towards the end of the year. At the end of the year, towards the end of the year, they're playing well, they're getting their footing. You lose to the Oakland Raiders in the black hole. And I touched on this in other shows as well, but Oakland's a bad team, folks. We all would agree with this, right? It's one of the few things in this world we're all going to agree. Republicans, Democrats, liberals, conservatives, Yinzers, intelligent Steeler fans, media, players, we all got it. The Raiders may even agree as well in their heart of hearts. The 2018 Oakland Raiders suck. Overall, not a good team. So fired up here, I'm missing on some of these graphics. But the Oakland Raiders are not a good team, guys. And the Steelers lost to them. They lost to the Oakland Raiders. In fact, the Steelers went 0-4 against the AFC West this year, and the Chargers are elite Super Bowl contenders, so okay, even though that included a 16-point collapse, because yes, there was controversial calls in that game, but the Steelers had a 16-point lead at home. You can't lose that if you claim you're a Super Bowl contender, even if your opponent also is, with also a future Hall of Fame quarterback. You're a Super Bowl winning quarterback. He's not. And that's nothing against Philip Rivers. I love him. You think he's underrated historically. But Ben and that Steelers team who made mistakes there, in addition to bad calls by the referees, they made mistakes, and their mistakes helped lead them to collapse. The defense played incredibly poorly in that second half, leading to the collapse. But that's an elite team. So, all right, you could chalk that up as a loss if you want to read the schedule ahead of time, if you knew how good the Chargers were going to be and Philip Rivers was going to be. But it's at home, by the way. But even if you forget that game, okay, Charger game, fine. The Broncos are an average team. An average team. That's not on the referees. That's on you, again, playing poorly and making mistakes, and you think you're a Super Bowl contender. They're not. You're supposed to be. They beat you. 0 for 4 against the AFC West. Two of those teams are elite. Two of those teams are contenders, the Chiefs and Chargers, so we'll forget them, even though they blew the lead of the Chargers and certainly should have won. The defense collapsing late, regardless of calls. But the Oakland Raiders, even, I don't care if it's in Pittsburgh, in Oakland, in Las Vegas, on the moon, you can't lose to them late in a year with your playoff hopes on the line. That's not the referees. That's you. That's the Steelers losing a game they shouldn't have lost. That's what they've been doing for many, many years. And I did a whole show on why Mike Tomlin's not going to get fired and why he won't get fired, and many of you do underrate him historically, and he is a Hall of Fame coach, and Cowher had the same landscape as him, and you gave Cowher all the rope, and I stand by all of that. Go find that on Pittsburgh Sports Live. Tomlin won't be fired. It's true. With that said, there has been a body of work for several years now of losing games against bad teams with 3, 4, 5 wins, non-playoff teams that you shouldn't lose to. And those games hurt their playoff positioning, force them to have to go on the road for AFC Championship games, where they would lose to, say, New England most of the time. But now, this year, they're really coming to a head, and they may cost them everything. They may cost them even the postseason. So I'd rather you go there and have that conversation, even though we all know Tomlin's not going to be fired, than to say the referees are the number one point of blame. Because, again, the referees have sucked this year, but the Pittsburgh Steelers have sucked that much more against bad teams they shouldn't lose to. They shouldn't have tied the Browns. They shouldn't have lost the Raiders. Also shouldn't have lost the Broncos. And shouldn't have blown a big lead against the Chargers if you also think are a Super Bowl contender. Period. Really, end of story, honestly. But yes, the referees cost them against the Saints. I'll give that to you. The referees sucked. And maybe had a bigger impact than the Steelers because Big Ben played amazing. That Steelers defense played even okay at times against a great offense in Drew Brees and the Saints. And the Joe Hayden phantom pass interference, that shouldn't have been. That was one of the most egregious pass interference calls since the Miami Hurricanes and the U got screwed out of the national championship against Ohio State. And that flag shouldn't have been there either. But bad calls are throughout the history of sports. And isolated games, sure, especially in the postseason or championship games. If a call like that, like Miami Hurricanes, those fans back in 2002, they got some gripe maybe because it was one game right there and that call did take the crown away in a close game. But for a regular season to decide whether you're going to be in the playoffs or not, every game counts. This is what Mike Tomlin will tell us every single week. So keep up to what your coach is saying or the players are saying. They won't use the referee as an excuse. Why should you? Every game matters. If the Steelers would have beat the Browns instead of tying them, if they would have beat the Oakland Raiders instead of losing to them, the Saints game wouldn't even have mattered. Say hypothetically, I'll play this game. Say hypothetically, the referees, which they're not, are running a conspiracy against Pittsburgh, against the Pittsburgh Steelers franchise, one of the most successful ever and the most successful in the Super Bowl era. And a franchise that has certainly benefited from controversial calls, by the way. But say the referees are running a conspiracy against the Steelers, or even have a bias. Or say you even if you don't believe a conspiracy because you're a little bit more sane than other Yinzers, and say that the referees are the number one point of blame for the year. Hypothetically, let's play with it. Let's go to the Charger game and the Saints game. Pull those two games. Say the referees lost those two games for you, whether it's intentional or not, regardless of how the Steelers played and blown some of those games, regardless. Say the referees got those two. If the Steelers would have then turned a Browns game without Baker Mayfield from a tie into a win, and a Raiders game against a horrible Raiders team into a win, that game being a loss into a win. So the Steelers would have turned a Browns tie without Baker Mayfield into a win, and a Raiders loss, a horrible Raiders loss to a really bad Raiders team into a win. Or even the Broncos game against an average Broncos team, say that's a win now. Any of those. Just even one of those, really. Say we're just focusing on the Saints in this controversial game because the Steelers did blow a 16-point lead to the Chargers. Whether it's those two and you got the Browns and Raiders games, you throw both the Browns and Raiders games into wins. The Saints and Chargers games don't mean as much at all. But say we're forgetting the Chargers and you just need to turn either one of the Browns or Raiders games. Just say one of them now, especially the Browns, the divisional game. Say the Browns tie with a Browns team without Baker Mayfield coming off an 0-16 season. Say that's now a win. Saints game doesn't matter. I mean, yeah, you're seeding in situations like that, and you might have to go on the road in the playoffs, and then we'll bring that conversation up again. That's legitimate. But at least you're be a playoff team. At least you don't have to worry about the Baltimore Ravens in the last week of the season, and at least you got the AFC North on lock. So even if the referees were conspiring, or even if they intentionally sucked or even accidentally sucked, it wouldn't have mattered because you would have taken care of your business because you're the much better team with more talent. You're the veteran team. You're a Super Bowl aspiration team. You're in win-now mode, according to the Steelers. That's why you didn't draft. That's why you drafted the way you did. Or should have. So if that's all true, then you should beat the Browns when they're 0-16 the season earlier. And even if that's beginning of the year and you put that away, the Oakland Raiders is at the end of the year. I know that Big Ben and the Steelers never can win out there no matter how good the Raiders are, but that can't just be how it is anymore. You can't just say, oh, he's a jerk, so that's just how he is. No big deal. Or that's just him being an a-hole. You know, that's him. Well, no, they're not excuses for a personality issue. You can't just say that's somebody and they just get to use that as an excuse. So the Steelers can't use the referees as an excuse either. The Browns game, tying the Browns without Baker Mayfield, unacceptable. Losing to the Oakland Raiders when you're fighting for your playoff life and you're a much better team and they're a horrible team, unacceptable. That's where you go. If you turn one of those games or even both of those games, the Charger and Saints games don't matter. Or at least the Saints game doesn't matter. It's an NFC team. It's not an AFC opponent. Saints game would not have mattered and wouldn't kill you out of the playoffs. It would have still kept your playoff hopes alive. You would probably still win the AFC North. It would have been unlocked for you. You would have won the division today. You'd be secure there. The Saints game wouldn't matter if you beat the Browns instead of tying them or beat the Oakland Raiders, a team you should have beat. Don't make those excuses for this team. They won't do it. You shouldn't either. Now, while I don't want to let you blame the refs, somebody else I don't want to let you blame. And that's Juju Smith-Schuster. Look at him after the game, look, or at least after the play. Because we all know fumbled and it led to the Saints win. That's when they kind of secured things, caught the ball and threw it on the ground and fumbled it. And look at him. Slumped over. There's James Conner, kind of shocked too, but trying to console him. James Washington gets over there in front after this picture was taken to console him as well. Hands on his face, helmet still on. Saw some of the interviews after, some of those videos with reporters who were there, and he looked despondent. He wasn't crying. I'm not going to say he was teary-eyed, but he certainly was taking the blame himself and was upset. And I saw some tweets where some of you guys were pointing at him. Don't do it. That's almost as ridiculous as blaming the referees. Juju has been one of the best players in the Pittsburgh Steelers for 2 years now. How many years has he been in the NFL? Oh, that's right. 2. Since he's entered the league, since Juju Smith-Schuster has entered the league from USC, he's almost immediately, you could see the ascension at that time, even early on, but relatively soon, he became one of the best players in the Pittsburgh Steelers. And even if you say there was a maturation process still his rookie year, where he had over 900 yards receiving, which is historic for a rookie, it's Randy Moss type stuff. He has been, without a shadow of a doubt, one of their best players this year. Maybe even the team MVP. Maybe even the best overall player this season. Now, no knock on AB or Antonio Brown. He also played great in that same slots, and he's played great most of the year. Another historic season for him. He's on a Hall of Fame pace. Best receiver in football. But he's also faced a lot more double coverage this year. He's really been, strangled up. It's been more difficult for him, and it's opened up space for Juju. Sure, AB has helped Juju But Juju has also helped AB. They both have played really well. But Juju, for his second year, it's even more remarkable. We already knew AB is one of the best receivers in football. Juju surprising us even now in his second year as maybe one of the best receivers in football and a team MVP of this team and one of the best players on the Pittsburgh Steelers. Along with AB and along with Ben and Cam Hayward and a few others. But Juju, yeah, I'm not going to say he shouldn't have kept the ball. Yes, Juju, just like anybody else, if you're on the field, Ridley too, they don't rely on much. He's a fourth-string running back and probably shouldn't have been in that situation. But anybody out in that field, you get the ball, you have a touch, you can't fumble. It's unacceptable to do so. Sure, I'm not making an excuse that way. Juju can't fumble. If he's going to be one of the best in football, if he's going to be one of the best in the league and the best ever, going to be a team leader whenever AB is done or gone, as he's getting older, then he has to lead by example and he can't fumble. Sure. No excuse there. But don't say Juju cost the team this year or Juju cost them the game or Juju ruined the year and then you're going to point to Juju's antics off the field, which I admit I get annoyed by sometimes too. It's not always lit to me. But Juju dancing in front of cars for social media posts and going to clubs just to film a picture, wearing certain hoodies, being branded by everyone out there and their brother. Also doing some great and wonderful things, going to retirement communities and things like that. But even when he does that, he's overly promoting it, and it's not a selfless deed. He certainly wants the credit, and he's fully out there. He's a millennial. He's a young millennial. I'm an old millennial. He's a young millennial. So annoys me a little bit. I can't deny that sometimes I don't roll my eyes and say, okay, Juju, that was a good deed, but wow, you're promoting it, something fierce. Or that was ridiculous. You just jumped in front of traffic during a red light. I don't want that. I don't want that red light or not. I don't want to see you in front of my car while I'm dealing with bumper-to-bumper traffic. That's annoying. But that doesn't have anything to do with him on the field because he's on the field showing up. This isn't a guy slacking off. This isn't Odell Beckham Jr. going to Miami on a boat before a playoff game in a whole other state. That's not happening. That's not Juju right now. Yeah, he's having fun and letting loose and getting lit maybe too often, living a lit life in his off time. But he shows up on Sunday, puts the work in, and plays well, and has been one of the best Steelers this season. For 2 years, really. And was in that game, too. He was in that game to the Saints. Doesn't excuse the fumble, and he took it harder than anybody else. He's going to blame himself and say he sucked. He didn't suck in that game, but that play sucked. But it wasn't why they lost that game. It wasn't why they are going to waste this year and all the talent. Okay? I'd rather you go referees than go Juju, really. Juju's been one of the best players in this team all year and shouldn't be taking this heat. It'd be one thing if his antics led to this and he had an off game. He played well. It was one miscue. It'll happen to everybody. There's Hall of Famers that have those. He's not your target either, or shouldn't be. And I'm not the only one who says this. I mean, here's Jeremy Fowler from ESPN, the one giving you the local/national coverage, going real in detail about speaking to Juju after the game, and for it to come down like this every week, it sucks. That's the quote from Juju there. You know, taking it on himself, which it's a veteran move, and as he should, just you guys shouldn't be blaming him. Go here. I brought him up already, and he's somebody that's had his off-field antics maybe affect him on the field with some poor games, some big poor games, playing poorly in big games, off the antics. We haven't seen that from Juju yet, but here we go. Team Juju from Odell Beckham Jr. Head high, killer. These moments make you, never break you. The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands at moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenging and controversy. So Odell Beckham Jr., OBJ getting prophetic there, dropping a line with a quote, and he's right. I appreciate it from OBJ. But Juju's been one of the best players on the Steelers, regardless of his off-the-field antics, which are certainly annoying. He's been one of the best players on the Steelers for 2 years now, absolutely without a doubt this year. And without him, they wouldn't even be in this situation. He's won a few games for the team. Don't throw at him. Don't throw your venom at him. Don't blame him for this loss. It was a bad fumble. It was an unacceptable play. But my God, he's been one of the best players on the team all year. So, I just had to lift it off my chest here. I want to give you some real quick reaction post-game. Usually wait a couple days and get some Tomlin press conferences, but we have the holiday season coming up. We got Christmas Eve, Christmas Day. Got a lot of things to take care of. Couldn't promise a show. So I figured, why not? On the trip home, hop into the studio here, the Beaver County Auto Studios up above Market Square here in downtown Pittsburgh. On the way home, it's on the trek. And just let off some steam. If my tweets are going to go viral and you guys are going to slide in my DMs and you're going to throw me tweets and threaten me, you're going to have egg anonymous accounts or even friends and colleagues coming at me, then I'm going to come back. I'm not always going to take it on the chin. I'm telling the truth. Some may not want to hear it. That does not mean you should deny it. You can't hate the truth. You can hate the truth all you want. You just can't deny it. That's the line. You can hate the truth all you want. You just can't deny it. That maybe is the title of this episode here for you. That's all you remember in life from this. Remember that. You can hate the truth all you want. You just can't deny it. And that's really the case here. Yes, the referees sucked. Yes, the referees have made controversial calls. Have they done it just against the Pittsburgh Steelers? Is there some Steelers against the world crazy NFL conspiracy referees hating on Pittsburgh? No. Have the calls against Pittsburgh, even if you somehow believe that, have the controversial calls of the Charger game and the Saints game single-handedly number one blame this year, and have they single-handedly ruined this season and why you should point to the referees number one for the whole year? No. They're part of it, okay. The calls sucked. There were controversy, but the Patriots could argue last week. The Saints could argue some in this game. Other teams could argue throughout the whole year. The Ravens could have argued. And they're the team the Steelers are fighting for the division title. There's controversial games all through an NFL season. Too many, and that's a rant for another day. Referees absolutely are sucking. It's entertaining in a way, allowing me to rant like this. Sure, the referees have sucked. We all agree. There's controversy there, and they maybe have hurt the team and impacted. I'll give you that. Impacted some of the games. But again, not the excuse. Don't let the Steelers team with all that talent off the hook by pointing your finger at the referees number one. Just don't do it. I'm not going to do it, and I'm not going to let you do it when I have the power to tell you why you're wrong. I'll use my credentials for good in that way. I'll fight the fight of truth. If you turn the Steelers' tie to the Browns without Baker Mayfield and the loss of the horrible Oakland Raiders around, and you make those two games wins, those two winnable games for sure against much worse teams with less talent, playing worse than the Steelers, you don't have to worry about the Chargers or Saints. You don't have to worry about these controversial games. You especially don't have to worry about an AFC team in the Saints. There, you're just really fighting it out for playoff positioning, but not to get in at all, not for the division title, not to have a loss maybe cost you the postseason in general. Come on. Beat the games you're supposed to beat. Win the games you're supposed to win. Beat the teams you're supposed to beat. Losing to bad teams, that got to irk you more than a few bad calls. Or it should. And Juju, one of the best players on this team, one of the best young players on this team, a bright spot of this team, the future of this team, he shouldn't get your hate either. If you want to hate the off-field antics, fine. They don't come to him on the field. They don't enter on the field. He shows up on the field, plays well, and that fumble sucked. But that's not the season either. Number one, though, it's not the referees. Sure, they made a few bad calls. They didn't ruin this year. They didn't have the Steelers play great all through the year and have the referees just ruin it on a few calls. The Steelers did not play as well as they should have. The Pittsburgh Steelers did not bring their A game throughout a year. They made too many mistakes. They waited too long to get going. And they lost the teams they otherwise shouldn't lose to. They lost to bad teams. They tied the Browns. They lost to the Raiders. They lost to an average Broncos team. They blew a 16-point lead to the Chargers, even though they're good. Turn those games around. Winnable games. Games they should have won. Certainly the Browns and Raiders. Win those games, you're not even in the situation. You don't even let the referees have the control, even if they want to somehow screw you over. You can hate the truth all you want. You just can't deny it. Well, I had to get head off my chest there. Finally, I'm going to calm down so I can enjoy my holiday. Want to remind you, though, make sure you, here you go, on the screen there. Click subscribe on the YouTube channel, Pittsburgh Sports Live on YouTube. Makes it easier for us to get this content to you, whether it be instant after games, whether it be the regular weekly shows, the Pens live chats from Kongursky, or even our just in-game coverage of Allen at Pitt and Zach Weiss at Duquesne, Dan with the Penguins, me with little Steelers dispersed in there. Go to our family of networks, the Pittsburgh Sports Now, the mothership, PittsburghSportsNow.com, Pittsburgh Soccer Now, PittsburghHockeyNow.com, and where this show and many of our shows, our visual and audio archive, our radio platform, our TV radio side outlet that I run, our website for all of that, for Pittsburgh Sports Live, PGHSportsLive.com as the site and where all this can live. Find us on Twitter at PGH Sports Live on Twitter. You can follow me to provide me more hate at Mike Asti 11, and I welcome the trolls, but I'm most likely going to ignore you. So the Pittsburgh Steelers, they haven't conquered enough. Regardless of the referees and those bad calls, the Steelers haven't conquered enough this year in 2018, especially against bad teams like the Browns and Raiders. They haven't conquered those teams when they should have. They haven't conquered enough this year, and that's why they might have another wasted season with all that talent, because they should conquer more with that roster. But once again, I tell you the truth. Like it or not, I keep it real, even if it's the heel opinion, and even if you think I'm being the bad guy, I'm just telling you the truth. So I conquer in that way, and I'm Mike Asti, keeping it real, keeping it as always real, one day at a time.